We have been down this road before. There's a lot of anticipation and hype when a new planar magnetic headphone is rumored for release. Audeze is the self-proclaimed standard-bearer for planar magnetic headphones, but there are excellent alternatives from Hifiman, Monolith, Sivka, and others. One place you might not expect to find a planar headphone is from a microphone company. Well, Blue Microphones has a unique planar magnetic headphone. It is called the Ella. It is the culmination of what Blue learned from their previous headphones. The Ella was released in 2017 and costs $700 MSRP. But at the moment, you can find it for around $400 on Amazon. Is the Ella a worthwhile consideration or a half-baked product? You might wonder how Blue Microphones could be competent enough to build a planar magnetic headphone. You might be tempted to conclude that Blue probably licensed a driver from China and slapped its name on the side. But you'd be wrong. Blue Microphones has been making headphones for years. It all started with the Blue MoFi, which was later renamed to the MixFi. Then there was the Lola, then the Sadie, then Satellite, and finally the Ella. All of these headphones use Blue's proprietary drivers. I now have the full collection of Blue headphones and will review them in due course. Regarding the Ella, Blue says that this headphone combines the transparent detail of planar magnetic drivers with the impact of dynamic technology. Blue states that the Ella uses custom-designed 50mm dual-sided drivers. The Ella comes with a 250mW amplifier built into the headphone. This is a key feature of all Blue headphones except for the Lola. The amplifier can be turned on or the headphone can be used in passive mode. It's your choice. Blue says that with a fully charged battery, the Ella's amplifier will provide amplification for about 12 hours. Blue says that the Ella provides a rich and extended soundstage. They claim that the Ella will provide extreme accuracy. Frankly, Blue is a non-committal company about the Ella's sound signature and overall performance. They make some general statements that come short of distinct promises. In other words, Audeze and Sennheiser promise that their headphones will reveal all the detail and have neutral sound, but Blue seems unwilling to resort to such misleading language. Blue says that each Ella is handmade in small quantities by expert craftsmen. Blue also touts the overall design and comfort, which we will discuss in the next section. The obvious elephant in the room is, well, the Ella. Look at it. Nothing about this headphone seems normal. The overall design is odd, to say the least, and ugly to many people. The headphone uses multi-joint suspension system that is a homage to Formula One race cars. The ear cups can be moved independently of each other and independently of the width adjustment as well. The entire headphone is built of metal. The ear cups, yoke, and headband are all metal. The knob which activates the amplifier also seems to be made of metal. Even the Blue logo on the ear cups is engraved metal. The ear pads and headband padding are made of leather. It is supple and soft. The padding might be dense memory foam, but it's hard to tell. The ear cups also have LEDs built behind the Blue logos. The LEDs glow a soft white when the amplifier is turned on. They blink rapidly to indicate low battery, and they blink slowly when charging. Blue did not skimp on the accessories. The headphone comes with 3 cables. One is a 3-foot audio cable, another is a 10-foot audio cable, there's a USB charging cable, a quarter inch adapter, and a soft carrying bag. Everything feels premium. The cables, including the charging cable, are made with cloth covering. The carrying bag has a super smooth lining on the inside. This will prevent unwanted scratches to the headphones. I do have one gripe about the headphones, and that's the proprietary cable design. Ella has a deeply recessed cable jack. No standard jack will be long enough to securely fit. Consequently, you must rely upon Blue's official cables or find a third-party alternative, and there are not many of those. As for comfort, the Ella provides decent comfort for such a large headphone. To put it in context, the Ella is about 60 grams lighter than the Audeze LCD-2 Classic. The Ella has a tight clamping force, but it is not uncomfortable. In fact, the rather large ear pads engulf my ears, and that clamping force pushes the headphones onto the side of my head and do not pinch my ears. Adjusting the Ella is rather easy. The idea is to get the 3 points of contact, top and on both sides. The multi-point suspension system really does allow for a fine-tuned fit. I found that passive noise isolation on the Ella is outstanding. Very few headphones block out as much noise as the Ella. The thick ear pads, metal construction, and tight clamp focus in a full seal around the ears. I've listened to the Ella for 3 hours at a time without any difficulty. In contrast, when I listen to the Monolith M1570, the Audeze LCD-2 Closed, or the LCD-2 Classic, I have to take a break every few hours due to the weight of each headphone and the lack of headband padding. The Ella, on the other hand, provides more comfort and hugs my face. Overall, the build and accessories are outstanding. This is what a premium headphone should feel like. I'm sure some will not like the clamping force of the Ella, but I think it is perfect. Consequently, I find the Ella to be a very comfortable, large over-ear headphone. I tested the Ella in 2 ways. First, I plugged it into my RME ADI2 and Earman TR amp. The RME is a neutral DAC amp. The TR amp has a slightly analytical lean, where bass is slightly recessed and treble has a marginal accentuation. I also tested using my Shit Mode E3 and Monolith Liquid Spark stack. This combination provides fairly neutral sound. In all of these setups, I did not have the Ella's amplifier activated. The idea was to get an impression of the passive driver performance. The second test was with the amplifier active, and we will talk about that later. I used a stock cable and played music through Amazon Music HD. The Ella appears to have a fairly neutral bass response, particularly in mid-bass. Sub-bass, however, has a slight roll-off. Transients is fast. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there is a low rumble from the beginning of the track. The Ella presented that rumble from the first second. It remained audible and clear. I thought that it might need a slight boost, but that could have been the result of fast transients instead. In other words, like other planar magnetic headphones, the Ella's bass reverberation is quite fast, and this might lead to some people thinking that the sub-bass has a slight roll-off. There is a crescendo at the middle of the song when the organ plays at maximum. The Ella presented the organ powerfully, and it cleanly cut through the other instruments. I could hear different instruments all vying for my attention. There was very little melding among the notes. The rolling thunder effect during the crescendo came through clearly, without bloat, and did not overwhelm the other instruments. When the vocals chimed in at the end, they rose from the back of the instruments to eventually stand about 1 step ahead. In Conquer by Overwork, there is a rolling marble effect at the beginning. This sound is supposed to pan from right to left to center. The Ella clearly presented the sound, and I heard the panning. There was very good clarity in this effect. There are multiple drums in this track, and the Ella presented all of them with precision. Every drum strike had hard, impactful sound. I could hear the thwacking of drumsticks hitting the drumheads, but there was no sharp, harsh peak. The synth was not fatiguing. I listened to Irodori by the Japanese drum band Kodo. This track uses 3 different types of drums: small, medium, and large barrel drum. All should have their unique sound signatures. The Ella did in fact present all 3 with good separation among them. I could distinguish the small drum from the medium, and the medium from the large. The drums had fast transients but still retained hard, precise impact. There was no muddiness or distortion. Instead, the Ella presented clear, detailed bass. I next listened to several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. On each track, the Ella presented the subwoofer effect from the start. However, it sounded like the subwoofer was in another adjacent room or on the other end of a very large room. It was evident that on these tracks, the sub-bass needed a boost of about 3 to 4 decibels. Mid-bass impact was energetic, though not peaky. There was good separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. The vocals were 2 steps ahead of the instruments. They were clear and had their requisite sparkle. I listened to Bim Bam Smash from the Bourne Supremacy soundtrack. There are several drums in this song, and the Ella was able to clearly and cleanly present all of them. At 1 minute and 15 seconds, there is a pause and then a hard drum strike timed to cars slamming into each other. The Ella presented that slam accurately. There was excellent clarity among all these instruments. Overall, the Ella presents a close to neutral bass. Sub-bass seems to have a slight roll-off, but mid-bass appears to be neutral. There is good separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. One does not bleed into the other. The Ella also has good detail and resolution in the bass frequency. It is not difficult to hear various bass instruments, all with their individual tonalities. Transients is as fast on the Ella as you would expect from any other planar. This means that the Ella's performance takes a hit on bassy tracks, such as hip-hop. Sub-bass immediately becomes distant in those types of songs. However, orchestral, pop, rock, electronic, and jazz all seemed to present close to neutral bass. The Ella has smooth, detailed, clear, and slightly forward mids. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is natural grain and sibilance mixed in. The Ella presented most of the grain, but I thought it also smoothed out a portion. That is, I have heard a bit more grain on more neutral headphones like the Avantone Planar and the Allo Audio S4X. Orla's sibilance was also present on the Ella. It appeared that the sibilance was just slightly emphasized, not by much, but perhaps a few decibels. This was not harsh or peaky, and not remotely like what the HD560S does. The guitar and drums had natural timbre, but the decay was fast on the drums. There was good separation between the instruments, and they all sounded fairly clear. Orla's voice was 2 steps ahead of the instruments. When the backup vocalist started singing at the end of the song, she was absolutely clear, separate, and further back from the primary vocalist. In Want You Back by Haim, the Ella again demonstrated that it does very slightly emphasize female sibilance. This was not harsh. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it appear gravelly. The Ella presented this detail, but it was rather fast. The quick transients resulted in detail that was audible, but just a little recessed. The 2 backup vocalists were perfectly easy to hear, each with their individual tonalities when they first appeared. When the instruments played at maximum, the backup vocalists were still distinguishable from each other. The guitar, drum, piano, and bass appeared to have accurate timbre. However, the bass seemed to be a bit recessed, and the drums had fast transients, which resulted in less reverberation when they played. In superposition by Young the Giant, the Ella properly recreated the ukulele and drums. Both seemed to have accurate timbre. The bass was audible, but seemed a little bit further back. The primary male vocalist had a smooth, clear voice. His sibilance appeared to be neutral. There's a backup vocalist in this track, and I could just hear him. The backup vocalist's voice was layered underneath of the primary singer's. Most headphones combine the voices and make them indistinguishable. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breaths. The Ella perfectly recreated this detail. I listened to several tracks by the folk singer Guy Clark. Guy used acoustic guitars in all his songs. He had a gruff, gravelly Marlboro Man type of voice. I listened to the songs The Guitar, The Cape, Cornmeal Waltz, and El Coyote. In each track, the Ella clearly presented every single instrument. There was excellent separation among them, and I could easily distinguish one from the other. Guy's voice retained most of its gruffness, but it also appeared that there was just a bit of smoothing added. The Avantone Planar and Allo S4X, for example, provide a more neutral, more gruff presentation of the voice. With each of Guy's tracks, I could hear the strumming and fast picking. I could hear multiple guitars layered over each other. The twang of acoustic guitar strings was visceral. I could hear how the thumb slid across a string as the fingers picked the other ones. I could hear the occasions when a string was slightly off tune. Overall, the Ella provides a smooth, natural tonality for mids. Vocals seem to be about 2 steps ahead of the instruments. There is a slight sibilance push for female vocals and a neutral presentation of male sibilance. There is good separation and clarity throughout the mid-frequency range. Multiple instruments meld only very slightly, and there was never a muddy sound. The Ella seems to have a neutral treble response, one which is fundamentally clear and precise. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the Ella presented the brass and horns in a neutral fashion. These instruments cut through the rest without being harsh. They retained their nasally sound signatures. A lot of headphones meld the multiple instruments in this track, but the Ella kept them clear. I could not hear individual instruments, but group sets were distinct. The timpani was audible, but a little bit recessed. The Ella presented width, depth, and some verticality. In other words, some instruments seemed further away, some more distant into the wings, and a few sounds came from above my head. This was not quite the semicircular presentation I hear on the Avantone Planar, but it was fairly close. In Flight from the City, the Ella rendered the piano as if it was about 8 feet away. The bassier notes were fast and did not distort. The cello was smooth and clear. It barely melded with the piano. I could hear the electric buzzing and pops and sizzles throughout the song. I heard the creaking of wood as the pianist shifted on his bench, and I could easily hear the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the Ella presented the piano in the right, the drum kit in the left, saxophone dead center, and the bass layered somewhere behind. The drums sounded full, though did have fast transients. All instruments were clear and barely melded together. The saxophone was 2 steps ahead, but remained smooth. It had its nasally sound. I could hear the different tonalities as the drummer hit the hi-hat at different positions. A lot of headphones meld this detail into one, and those hi-hat strikes sound identical one after the other. I listened to several orchestral pieces including Suite Italienne by Istvan Verdai, Brahms' Cello Sonata No. 1, several pieces by Beethoven, and La Musica Notturna from the Master and Commander soundtrack. Each and every one of these tracks sounded full on the Ella. Every instrument was clear, accurate, and detailed. There was very good separation among multiple instruments as they played together, and the Ella never distorted even at above safe volume levels. No instrument sounded harsh or peaky. Most tracks appeared to have an almost semicircular presentation. In other words, it almost felt as if the instruments were arrayed around me. Overall, the Ella has neutral treble presentation. On top of that, it has excellent clarity and detail in the treble region. Instruments sound crisp but not harsh. Multiple instruments are easily distinguishable. Throughout the sound test, I tried to highlight the details I could hear with the Ella. In this section, I will merely summarize. I have heard a lot of planar magnetic headphones, including nearly the entire LCD line from Audeze, the Sundara, the HE5SE, the Diva, all of Monolith's headphones, and a few Chinese planars. I have yet to hear a planar magnetic headphone that provides the detail and clarity of something like the Sennheiser HD800S or Focal Clear or Austrian Audio Hi-X55, and these 3 are dynamic driver headphones. Some people misunderstand that just because a headphone has planar drivers, that those headphones will have amazing detail. I don't think that's the case, and if you actually define detail on a spectrum, you'll get to understand this. In my experience, the HD800S and Focal Clear rival each other on detail retrieval. The Hi-X55 is the only other headphone I've heard that comes close to the detail presentation of the Sennheiser and Focal headphones. The headphones with the worst detail presentation include Every Beats I was forced to listen to, the Blonde BL30, the Teenage Engineering headphone I recently reviewed, and, of course, the Audeze Mobius. The Ella is far from the 800S or the Clear or the X55. But the Ella is perfectly in line with other planar headphones I've heard, other than the Mobius. The Ella has clarity and very good separation of instruments. The fast transients means that the bass does not bleed into the mids and that the sub-bass and mid-bass do not meld to cause bloating. Vocals are crisp and precise. Multiple vocalists are easily audible. Obvious details are present without having to hunt for them. Subtle details are also audible. Throughout my tests, the Ella did not struggle to present the various tonalities of different drums, multiple vocalists, creaking of wood, shifting of cellos, pops and sizzles, electric buzzing, twang of guitar strings, breathing, and other details. However, the Ella does not force-feed detail into your ears. That is what the X55 and HD800S do. Instead, the Ella strikes a fair balance between clarity, detail, resolution, and natural presentation. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sounds of children, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S provides 21 footsteps in the first 60 seconds. The Focal Clear presents 18 footsteps in the first 60 seconds. The Hi-X55 presents 15 footsteps. The Hifiman Sundara presents 10 to 11 footsteps. The Avantone Planar presents 9 to 10 footsteps. The Audeze LCD-1, Sennheiser HD6XX, and 660S each presents 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents 6 to 7 footsteps. And the Blue Ella presents 8 to 9 footsteps. The Ella was clearly not able to reach the same level as the X55 or Focal Clear, to say nothing of the HD800S. But in the grand view, the Ella was fairly similar in average performance among other headphones, including the Sundara and the Avantone Planar. As with the sound test, when I listened to New Light over and over again, I distinctly heard the separation of various elements. The Ella simply has the ability to parse out different instruments and details. Nothing sounds congested or bloated. Each instrument or detail has its own sound. Of course, the Ella is not a detailed-oriented headphone, and you will not hear everything that might be hiding in a mix. Indeed, not a single planar magnetic headphone I have heard can do what the dynamic drivers in the X55, Full Cal Clear, and the HD800S can. Soundstage is the perception of music dependent upon the original recording and the headphones or speakers you're using. DACs and amplifiers have nothing to do with Soundstage. A distinctly warm-sounding DAC, such as the Chord Mojo or the AudioQuest Dragonfly Red, may present less clarity and detail, which may make you think that your headphones have a narrower soundstage than they actually do. Assuming you have a neutral source, or that your headphones receive proper amplification, or in other words, your amp is powerful enough for your headphones, then the soundstage you hear should not vary from one neutral system to the next. I have a spectrum of soundstage. Every single Beats headphone I have heard has narrow, claustrophobic soundstage. The Audeze Mobius is exactly the same as these Beats headphones in this respect. The Neumann NDH20 has below average soundstage. The Audeze LCD-1, HD6XX, and HD660S have average soundstage. The LCD-2, Monolith M1570, Hifiman Sundara, Austrian Audio Hi X55, and Avantone Planar have above average to just below wide soundstage. The Hifiman Diva has wide soundstage. The HD800S has super wide soundstage. The Blue Ella has about average soundstage, similar to that of the LCD-1, HD6XX, and HD660S. Depending on your recording, the Ella does have the ability to show depth, width, and some verticality. In other words, if your music was recorded with multiple microphones and mixed to provide an ambient room feel, then the Ella should provide that experience. This is easiest to hear with orchestral recordings, as those songs do have expert use of multiple microphones. Now that we have discussed the sound performance with an external amplifier, let us briefly talk about the Ella's built-in amp. The amp inside the Ella is a proprietary design by Blue. Supposedly, this amp has 250 milliwatts. Blue does not say if this is 250 milliwatts into 50 ohms, which is the Ella's impedance, or if the amp provides 250 milliwatts at some other impedance. The Ella has two amp modes. The first is on. The second is on plus. There's a difference between the two. With the amp on, the Ella's power takes over. If you have the Ella plugged into an external amplifier, then turn the Ella's amp on, you'll immediately hear a boost in volume. If you try doing this with the battery depleted, then you won't hear anything. In other words, if the Ella is not charged, then switching the headphone on will mean that you hear absolutely nothing. You'll have to switch the amp off so that the external amp can power the headphones. The Ella's amp does not have volume control. You'll get a certain decibel boost. Blue does not say how much that boost is. If I were to guess, I would say it's probably around 10 decibels, but that's entirely speculation. If you have the Ella plugged into an external amplifier and turn the Ella's amp on, then you can adjust volume with the external amp. In essence, the external amp turns into a preamplifier. The principle is the same when the Ella is used with a DAP or other device. There is no popping or noise when the Ella's amp is turned on. Blue says that the Ella's amp will provide greater dynamic range. There's some marketing fluff in the manual. Basically, they're correct, but not in the way you might think. You see, if you plug the Ella into a DAP or phone or an amp that does not have sufficient power, the drivers will not get sufficient power to perform at their best. You might hear muddier or undeep sound. This is true for any headphone. Once the headphones receive sufficient power for peak performance, you will hear a difference. That's the point that Blue is trying to make, I think. However, if you have a powerful amplifier, for example the Schiit Magni or Monolith Liquid Spark, then switching the Ella's amp on will not provide greater dynamic range or resolution than what those external amps can provide. Let's briefly talk about the on plus mode. This mode has nothing to do with more power. Instead, on plus adds a slight analog adjustment for additional bass. This was intended for vinyl recordings. The Ella's manual does not say how much bass boost you will get, but in an interview with one of the Blue representatives on YouTube, it was said that the on plus mode provides about 3 to 4 decibel bass boost. It was also noted in that interview that the boost is best heard with vinyl recordings and is less perceptible with digital recordings. I played around with the Ella's amplification using different configurations, and this is what I did. I plugged the Ella into the RME80i2, Monolith Liquid Spark, Earman TR amp, all of which were connected to my PC. I also connected the Ella to the AudioQuest Dragonfly Cobalt, which was connected to my iPhone 12 Max. I further connected the Ella directly into my LG V30's 3.5mm jack. I turned the Ella's amplification on, tried to volume match, and then listened carefully to any alterations to the sound signature. Without boring you with each detail, the short version is this. The Ella's amp does not alter the driver's sound signature. The Ella's amp is neutral. The only difference is that the amp boosts the gain. Blue believes that audiophiles might want to use this headphone with mobile devices. Yes, there are several DAPs that can now provide sufficient power for full-size planar magnetic headphones. Take a look at the FIO M15 for example. But that is a lot of money, and many people are perfectly happy using their phones or smaller, less powerful DAPs than the M15. To test the functionality with mobile devices, I plugged the Ella into my LG V30. I was not able to find measured output power for the V30, but some comments and forums suggest that the V30 is capable of providing 2 VRMS into high impedance loads. I initially left the Ella's amplifier off when I plugged it into the V30. I played various tracks from different genres. I was able to get comfortable volume at 50% from the V30 alone. The headphone got to maximum safe volume at about 80% volume. I then returned the volume to 50% and turned the amp. There was a noticeable difference in ways. First, there is clearly a volume boost with the amp. Second, the amp resulted in greater clarity, better separation of details, and no distortion. While the Ella was plugged into the V30 and without the amp turned on, there seemed to be a muddier sound with less detail and bass bleed into the mids. As for the on plus mode, well, there is some difference, but it's not consistent. Some modern tracks tend to exhibit a minor change while most do not. I went to archive.org to listen to various digitized vinyl recordings. Unfortunately, on plus mode did not make any difference for those recordings. This is consistent with what Blue says in the manual and in their interviews. It's a bit odd that Blue decided to implement a bass boost function that will not work with the vast majority of modern music, but at least they did not claim otherwise. I do not have a record player, so I have no way of testing the on plus mode as it is intended. I can only assume that the bass boost is more noticeable when an actual record is playing rather than a digital recording. As for noise, I am happy to report that the Ella's amplifier does not exhibit any audible noise or distortion. The Ella has some interesting features for the amplifier built in. Let's say you put the Ella on your head and turn on the amp. You then later decide to take a break and take the headphones off your head and put them on your desk. Two things will happen. First, the Ella's amp will shut off and all sound will stop. There is a trigger built into the Ella's suspension system. If you open the headphone as if you were putting them on your head, the trigger will turn the amp back on. The second thing is a bit of a gimmick, but worth mentioning. As I said at the beginning of this video, the Ella's ear cups have LEDs built behind the blue logos. When the amplifier is on, those LEDs provide a soft white glow. If the amp is not on, those LEDs are off. If you take the headphone off your head with the amp on, the LEDs will also turn off along with the amplifier. They will turn right back on when you put the headphone back on your head with the amp active. Blue says that the Ella is an audiophile headphone, and for the price, it better be. But Blue does not actually say what the sound signature is supposed to be. They claim that the Ella has powerful, detailed, impactful sound, but that's pretty vague. Well, the lack of specific information means there's less to be picky about and more to discover. It appears to me that the Ella has a fairly balanced sound signature, leaning closer to neutral. I believe the Ella has a slight sub-bass roll-off, but close to neutral mid-bass. Sub-bass and mid-bass do not meld, and there is good clarity, definition, and detail in that region. The bass also does not bleed into the mids. Transients as fast as you would expect from any planar magnetic headphone. The mids are slightly forward. Female sibilance has a marginal accentuation. This is nowhere close to the accentuation you will hear on the Sennheiser HD560S, but it is a touch above neutral. I would say that the sibilance push is similar to what I hear on the Aulo S4X. Every instrument sounds clear and distinct with correct timbre. Vocals shine through. Treble is neutral, detailed, and precise. There is no harshness. I would not characterize the Ella as a dark-sounding headphone. It is not. Neither would I say that the Ella is an analytical headphone. Again, it is not. But it is not actually neutral, though it does have elements of neutrality. If vocals were slightly more restrained, then I would venture to say that the Ella is a fairly neutral headphone. But it's the marginal sibilance push and sub-bass roll-off which prevents the Ella from joining the neutral club, but not by a whole lot. The Ella's ability to render clarity is fairly impressive. It is not too different from the Hifiman Sundara and Avantone Planar. The Ella is clearly more resolving, more clear, more crisp, more precise than the LCD-1, HD6XX, and HD660S. But all of those headphones do have a darker sound signature. All of them have a mid-bass emphasis that bleeds into the mids. Many people enjoy that type of sound signature, as some bass bleed might add body or presence to mid-centric instruments and vocals. Indeed, if you were to compare the HD6XX to the Sundara, you might conclude that the 6XX has a more natural vocal presentation and that the Sundara's vocals are a bit thin. But that is merely a matter of preference. The Ella probably will not make you jump out of your seat in amazement. Other headphones can achieve same things as the Ella. To be honest, we have heard many good headphones in the last several years that it is becoming harder and harder to say that one headphone sounds dramatically different from another, assuming we are judging headphones within the same classification. For example, balanced sounding headphones may have some differences among them, but clearly they share commonality, otherwise they would not be all grouped into the balanced sound signature category. The same thing goes for warm sounding or analytical headphones. We group headphones together because they tend to exhibit similar traits. We then go about trying to find differences. Sometimes those differences are minor, sometimes they are major, but rarely are there huge differences, unless of course you're trying to jumpstart the hype train. So let's put the Ella into context. In my opinion, it is a balanced sounding headphone that is just shy of being neutral. Or you could say that it is fairly neutral but closer to balanced sounding. Either way, the Ella's performance won't knock your socks off if you've heard the Avantone Planar or Hifi or Monolith M1570, but neither does the Ella fall short. Instead, the Ella revolves in the same gravitational field as those other planar headphones. To that end, in the next sections, we will briefly discuss comparisons between the Ella and the other planar headphones. It is best to compare products so that you have a full picture of overall performance. Consequently, in this section, we will briefly discuss comparisons to other planar magnetic headphones around the same price as the Ella. This will not be a thorough examination, merely a summary of my experience comparing each product to the Ella. I have already reviewed all of these headphones in previous videos, and if you want more in-depth analysis, please watch those related videos. For these tests, I plugged the headphones into my passive AB switch. That switch was plugged into my RME ADI2 DAC. I played music through Amazon Music HD. I tried my best to volume match. All headphones were used with their stock ear pads and cables. None of the headphones' ear pads showed significant wear. The Ella does not need to have its internal amplifier active when used with the RME, but I decided to keep it on since the amp is in fact a big feature of this headphone. For each of the following comparisons, we will quickly talk about the overall sound signature of these competitor headphones, what differences I can hear, and the build and comfort. The Avantone Planar is a $400 headphone. I have thoroughly reviewed this product if you're interested about it. The Avantone Planar has less sub-bass presence than the Ella. As I mentioned in the Planar's review series, that headphone's one sonic issue is the sub-bass roll-off. It is not anemic, but fairly obvious. The two headphones are very similar in sub-bass and mid-bass clarity and detail. However, I would give the slight edge to the Avantone Planar. Mid-bass impact is a bit harder on the Ella. The Avantone Planar, by comparison, seems to have a slight bit less energy for drum strikes. Of the two, I think that the Planar is closer to neutral, but the Ella is not far behind. Transient seems to be very similar between these headphones. The mids are neutral on the Avantone Planar, whereas on the Ella they are a bit forward and slightly sibilant. Indeed, the Avantone headphones keep vocals smooth yet detailed without adding or deleting sibilance or grain. Separation of instruments is similar, but the Avantone Planar appears to have a bit more clarity. Tonality and timbre of instruments was similar, but the Ella's presentation was closer to the ears. Treble is neutral on the Avantone Planar and similar to what I hear on the Ella. I could not find any significant differences here. However, I must point out that the Ella seem to exhibit a bit more clarity in treble instruments, and all instruments seem to be a little bit closer than what I heard on the Planar. As for detail, the Avantone Planar provides a bit more than the Ella. The differences are not significant, but noticeable. I think that the Planar's sub-bass roll-off helps in this regard. Clarity is very similar between these headphones. On some tracks, the Planar sounded a little bit clearer, and on others, the Ella did. In new light, the Planar presented 9 to 10 footsteps. As for Soundstage, I think that the Avantone Planar is marginally wider. It also tends to exhibit a bit more verticality than the Ella. Regarding build and comfort, I find both headphones comfortable, but the Planar has less clamping force. My Avantone Planar has no build issues, but I know some people have complained about the suspension headband loosening over time. The M1060C is about $230. It is a favorite among audiophiles because of its affordable price and potential modifications. The M1060C is a darker sounding headphone than the Ella. The differences are not night and day, but noticeable. For example, the 1060C has slightly more sub-bass, but less clarity than the Ella. Indeed, the 1060C has melding of sub-bass and mid-bass. Transients, however, is about the same. Mid-bass impact is slightly harder and clearer on the Ella. The 1060C appears to have a slightly blunted effect here. In other words, drum strikes have a bit more energy on the Ella. The mids are similar but not the same. The 1060C has greater female sibilance than the Ella. The difference is by a few degrees. The 1060C is still less sibilant than the HD560S. Vocals sound a little bit more full on the Ella. The Ella also presents vocals a bit closer to the ears than the 1060C. The 1060C has a slight distortion in treble instruments when compared to the Ella. Brass and horns tended to exhibit a slight fluctuation, almost as if someone had coughed while blowing into the instruments. This was a very minor difference, but audible. The 1060C also appeared to have a bit more treble energy than the Ella, and the Ella appeared to be smoother overall. As for detail, the 1060C is less clear than the Ella. Separation of instruments is more obvious on the Ella, and the 1060C tends to melt instruments more than the Ella does. There is not a significant difference in detail retrieval, but when doing an A/B test, the Ella appears to have a bit more detail retrieval. In the song New Light, the M1060C presented 7 footsteps. I think that the 1060C has similar soundstage to the Ella, but the Ella is probably marginally wider. As for build and comfort, the 1060C is a difficult headphone to like for build. The ear cups swivel 360 degrees and the headband is thin metal. I find that the headband padding is a bit lacking and it causes hot spots fairly quickly for me. The Ella's design makes that headphone hug my head, whereas the M1060C just hangs from the top and clamps down a little bit on the sides. The M1070 is one of Monolith's newest headphones. It retails for around $400. The 1070 has a sub-bass roll-off that is noticeable. The Ella has more neutral sub-bass in comparison. However, in exchange for the roll-off, the 1070 does provide good sub-bass and mid-bass separation, and I think it is somewhat similar to what I hear on the Ella. The 1070 provides a bit more clarity than the Ella, with bass instruments sounding a bit further away. Mid-bass impact is harder on the Ella. The 1070, by comparison, seems to have a slightly blunted effect. In other words, drums on the 1070 sound as if there's a very thin bed sheet in front of the speaker. There's a slight, and I do mean slight, loss of bass slam on the 1070. The 1070 accentuates female sibilance more so than the M1060C. This is still a little bit less than what I hear in the HD560S, but clearly elevated anyway. In comparison, the Ella has smoother mids with closer to neutral sibilance. The 1070 also seems to elevate natural grain in vocals. The timbre of mid-centric instruments is very similar between these headphones. However, the Ella presents all instruments and vocals closer to the ears. The 1070 appears to have a slight emphasis in treble compared to the Ella. That additional energy is not harsh or peaky, but obvious with an A/B test. I think the 1070 provides a marginal amount more detail, but that could just be due to the open back nature of the headphone. The tonality of instruments was very similar between these headphones. As for detail, the 1070 appears to have a bit more clarity. This is partly due to the sub-bass roll-off and open back design. However, that marginal increase in clarity does not result in significant detail gains. On the song New Light, the 1070 presented 8 footsteps. The Ella is better built than the 1070. It is also more comfortable. The M1070s is a bit lighter, but the headphones do not clamp enough for my liking. The M1570 is Monolith's flagship headphone, at least for the time being. It retails for $600. The M1570 has more sub-bass presence than the 1070. Indeed, I would say that the 1570 is similar in this regard to the Ella. Sub-bass and mid-bass separation seems very similar between these headphones, as does bass detail and resolution. If I were forced to give an edge, I would say that the M1570 is a little bit clearer. Mid-bass impact is actually a little bit harder on the M1570. In fact, it is a bit more visceral than what I hear on the Ella. The difference is not night and day, but noticeable upon A/B testing. Decay is similar between these two headphones, however. The M1570 presents mids similarly as to the M1070. The 15 retains the 1070's sibilance push, but has smoother grain. The difference in sibilance between the 1570 and Ella is not significant. In fact, I think that the 1070 has marginally more than the 1570. Nevertheless, the Ella presents smoother vocals and mid-centric instruments. Timbre and tonality was hard to distinguish between these two headphones. Treble on the 1570 is smoother than what I hear on the Ella. This is not a significant deviation, but certainly noticeable. Brass and horns are a bit easier to listen to, they are smoother, and have less nasally sound on the M1570. This, of course, also means that the M1570 is not presenting neutral treble and does have a veneer of smoothness. Detail and resolution in the treble frequency was very hard to distinguish between these headphones, but I think that the Ella has a bit more of both. Regarding detail retrieval, I was a bit surprised to learn that both headphones perform very similarly. Even though the M1570 is an open back design, its overall clarity is not that much greater than the Ella's. Indeed, I never heard more detail on the M1570 than what I heard on the Ella. On the song New Light, the 1570 presented 8 to 9 footsteps. As for soundstage, this was unsurprising. The 1570 has wider soundstage than the Ella. This is to be expected considering the open back nature of the M1570. On the scale of soundstage, I would say that the 1570 is above average, whereas the Ella is average. Build and comfort is rather different. The 1570 is far larger and not as easy to wear as the Ella. Although there is generous padding on both headphones, the Ella's contoured placement means that it will conform to the shape of your head, whereas the 1570 will merely hang from the top of your head. The Hifiman Sundara is $350 and is, quite frankly, the darling of audiophiles. The Sundara has a sub-bass roll-off that is noticeably quieter and less present than what I hear on the Ella. Transience is about the same in both headphones. The Sundara has about similar sub-bass and mid-bass separation compared to the Ella. In other words, both headphones present clear bass without distortion. Mid-bass impact is harder on the Ella. The Sundara has a bit less energy in drum hits. Clarity in mid-bass is very similar to what I hear on the Ella. However, the Ella has more intimate presentation of the bass region. That is, the Ella makes instruments sound a bit closer to the ears. The mids on the Sundara are very similar to what I hear on the Ella. The Sundara also has a slight accentuation of female sibilance, and I think it is hard to differentiate this detail between these two headphones. However, I believe that the Ella provides a bit smoother vocal grain. The Sundara is probably the more neutral headphone in this regard. Moreover, the Ella presents mids closer to the ears than the Sundara. All mid-centric instruments appear to have correct timbre and similar decay on both headphones. The Sundara's treble is similar to what I hear on the Ella. Both headphones seem to present similar, if not the same, amount of energy for treble instruments. However, the Ella has a bit more clarity in this region. Separation of instruments is very similar between these two headphones. The Sundara presents music further back than the Ella. This means that the Ella has a more intimate presentation. Detail retrieval is greater on the Sundara. It is not night and day. The Sundara's sub-bass roll-off and open back design allows for some details to appear marginally more clearly. In the song New Light, the Sundara presented 11 footsteps. Soundstage is greater on the Sundara. The Ella has average soundstage comparable to that of the HD6XX and LCD-1. The Sundara has above average to just below wide soundstage. Build and comfort is different. The Ella is clearly the better built headphone, more robust as well. The Sundara has comfortable earpads and a gentler clamping force, and it's also lighter. The LCD-2 closed is $900 MSRP. From now on, I will refer to it as the closed instead of the LCD-2 closed. It's just a lot easier to say. The closed presents similar sub-bass response as the Ella. Transience is about the same. There is similar sub-bass and mid-bass clarity and separation on both headphones. Upon repeated A/B tests, it appeared that the Ella has marginally more sub-bass presence, but the closed has marginally more sub-bass and mid-bass separation. Mid-bass impact is similar between these two headphones. I think that the closed has slightly more veiled, marginally less energetic presentation of drum strikes. Clarity in this region is very comparable and hard to distinguish. The Ella presents bass instruments a bit more intimately than the closed. The closed has similar mids presentation as the Ella. Both headphones accentuate female sibilants, and I think they do it about the same degree. The closed has marginally more vocal grain, whereas the Ella tends to smooth this detail. Instruments tend to sound pretty much the same on both headphones, with the same timbre and decay. However, it appeared to me that the Ella might have a bit more separation of instruments. Indeed, multiple vocals tended to sound marginally clearer on the Ella. The closed has a treble push compared to the Ella. Indeed, the Ella sounds more neutral in this regard. Treble instruments have more energy and become a bit peaky on the closed, at least when both headphones are volume matched for slightly below maximum safe volume. I would not call this a night and day difference, but merely one that can be heard in an A/B test. Detail retrieval is similar between these headphones, although I would say that the Ella is just slightly clearer. The closed never presented details that were not apparent on the Ella. Indeed, there were some occasions when the Ella had more crisp, precise presentation of the same details that I heard on the closed. On the song New Light, the closed presented 7 to 8 footsteps. Soundstage is similar between these headphones. In other words, both headphones fall into the average category. However, due to the closed's larger ear cups, there is somewhat larger presentation of soundstage on the closed. This is a difference in mere degrees. The closed is not a wide-sounding headphone. Moreover, whereas the Ella does have some ability to render depth, width, and verticality, the closed never presented verticality. Its performance for depth, or in other words, placing instruments and vocals further back, was very similar to what I heard on the Ella. As for build and comfort, the Ella is more comfortable and the two headphones have very good build, each in their own right. The closed is more difficult to wear because the Audeze does not provide any padding for the headband other than a slim layer of leather. Clamping pressure seems to be very similar on both headphones. The Ella, however, contours to your head. The LCD-2 Classic is $800. I will refer to it as the Classic from now on. The Classic has a noticeable sub-bass roll-off. The sub-bass is less present and more muted than what I hear on the Ella. The Classic, however, does have greater sub-bass and mid-bass separation, resulting in slightly more clarity in the bass region. Whereas the Ella presents bassy instruments closer to the ears, the Classic has them further away. Mid-bass impact on the Classic is actually fairly similar to what the Ella does. Both headphones present the thwacking of drumsticks on drum heads. However, the Ella creates more reverberation, making drums sound more full. The Classic pushes vocals forward and accentuates sibilants noticeably more than the Ella. Indeed, the Classic marginally accentuates natural grain in vocals but pushes sibilants more so. Vocals sound thinner than they do on the Ella. In other words, on the Classic, vocals have less support from the bass instruments and may appear to be a little shouty to some. Timbre and decay of instruments was the same, and if there's any difference, it's very hard to tell. Treble is similar between the Ella and Classic. However, there are two key differences. First, the Classic sounds a little airier, that is, it provides a bit more separation of treble instruments. Second, the Classic seems to have just a slight emphasis in treble, and all treble instruments sound further away. In contrast, the Ella is closer to neutral and has a more intimate presentation. Timbre and decay sounded similar, if not the same. Detail retrieval is not significantly different. The Classic is an open back and has more separation of instruments and therefore a bit more clarity. This does not manifest on every occasion, but it is audible. However, the Classic did not reveal details that the Ella was hiding. Both headphones demonstrated the same details, except that the Classic was slightly clearer on some occasions. In new light, the Classic presented 7 to 8 clear footsteps. As for Soundstage, the Classic has more of it. The Classic has above average soundstage, but not quite wide. It's probably comparable to the Sundara and the Avantone Planar. Regarding build-in comfort, I think that the Classic is fairly well built and probably the most comfortable of all the large LCD headphones, but that is not saying much. The Classic still does not have headband padding. The Ella is built better, is more robust, and has a contoured fit. The Audeze LCD-1 is $400 and was very much hyped when it was first released. The LCD-1 has a similar sub-bass response compared to the Ella. Both headphones tend to roll off sub-bass. However, the Ella has clearer sub-bass presentation. There is greater sub-bass and mid-bass clarity on the Ella, whereas the LCD-1 tends to meld the two. Mid-bass impact is harder on the Ella. The LCD-1 has a more blunted bass energy. In other words, the Ella has a sharper sound when drums are struck, whereas the LCD-1 produces a sound that is a bit more muffled. There is noticeably more detail on the Ella in bass instruments, and instruments sound more precise on the Ella. Transience is very similar in both headphones. The LCD-1 has more forward mids, particularly the vocals. There is a significant push in sibilants and natural grain on the LCD-1. This presents a somewhat shouty vocal presentation, especially for female artists. The Ella, on the other hand, has a smoother presentation. The Ella also has a sibilance emphasis, but it is slight compared to the LCD-1. Vocals sound more intimate on the LCD-1. Mid-centric instruments appear to have similar timbre and decay. The LCD-1 and Ella appear to have very similar treble response. Both headphones tend to exhibit the same type of energy for treble instruments. However, I believe that the Ella has slightly greater clarity. The LCD-1 presents all instruments closer to the ears, whereas the Ella has them a step or two further back. Detail retrieval is comparable between the headphones. The LCD-1 never presented more detail than the Ella. Instead, the LCD-1 has a more veiled sound signature, which results in less clarity. On new light, the LCD-1 presented 6 to 7 footsteps. Soundstage is similar between these headphones, and they both share the same sphere as the HD6XX and the HD660S. As for built-in comfort, the Ella is superior. The LCD-1 is made primarily of plastic. It is a somewhat fragile headphone because of this. However, the LCD-1 is lighter. We discussed a lot in this video. I took the opportunity to delve into many comparisons, and there's a ton of stuff to process. I want to build up to the conclusion and value assessment for the Ella. I want to discuss a little bit regarding planar magnetic headphones first. I hope that by the end you will have a better idea how to distinguish fact from fiction and hype from sober reflection. So bear with me. Planar magnetic headphones share some commonalities. The drivers are more expensive to build. The drivers are more fragile than traditional dynamic drivers. Planar drivers require considerable more power than dynamic drivers. And planar drivers usually exhibit faster transients and clarity than their dynamic driver counterparts. There are other often repeated comments about planar drivers. For example, that planar magnetic drivers have less distortion and are more accurate than dynamic drivers, that they have better bass, and that planar magnetic drivers provide true or the best sound. There is a lot of falsehood involved in the audiophile world. Companies are very happy to provide you misleading information. Sometimes they will flat out lie to you, as in the case of Audeze, AudioQuest, and in some instances, Sennheiser. Audiophiles have a tendency to take what they read online and believe what's repeated just because they see the same or similar comment in various forums. After all, it cannot be false if many people say it, right? The more you delve into audio gear, the more you experiment, and the more money you spend, the more you begin to critically evaluate the claims. Claims not just by manufacturers, but also by other audiophiles. Why all this preamble? Because I'm leading up to a statement that is not repeated often enough. Here it is. there is nothing special about planar magnetic headphones. Yes, planar magnetic headphones often tend to provide faster transients, more instrument separation, and additional clarity when compared to typical dynamic drivers. But this is not always the case. In fact, over the last few years, we have seen many good dynamic driver headphones that have as much clarity, and sometimes more, than planar magnetic headphones. The Focal Clear, Austrian Audio Hi X55, Sennheiser HD800S are just 3 examples of headphones that beat the crap out of planar magnetic headphones when it comes to detail, resolution, and soundstage. But you don't have to buy expensive headphones like the 800S or Clear, nor do you have to force yourself to like the analytical sound signature of the X55. You can get clarity, detail, and soundstage comparable to planar magnetic drivers from dynamic driver headphones that cost a lot less. Take a look at the Bass Audio G12, Sivka Phoenix, and Focal Elex, and that's just the beginning of the list. So, while I compared many planar magnetic headphones in this video, I am not suggesting people should buy planar magnetic headphones. There are 2 big reasons why I think planar magnetic headphones will not make dynamic drivers obsolete. First, the price. Second, the bass response. I have heard many planar magnetic headphones, and not a single one has ever properly recreated sub-bass. Yes, transients is usually fast, but sub-bass presence has always been lacking. If not anemic, then certainly underemphasized. In light of all of this, what does the Blue Ella provide when compared against its planar magnetic brethren? Well, the Ella still has the sub-bass roll-off I just spoke of. This is the same problem with every other planar headphone I've tested. Sure, some of these headphones have a bit more sub-bass presence than others, but none are actually neutral in this regard. All of these headphones have a different sound signature, sometimes in minor ways and sometimes in more obvious ways. For example, the M1060C does not sound like the LCD-2. Both headphones share similarities, and you might not be able to tell a significant difference, but it's still there. Some of these headphones are more neutral than others. The Avantone Planar, for example, is the most neutral planar magnetic headphone I have yet heard. The Ella is not neutral, though it does have some neutral features. For example, the mid-bass appears to be fairly close to neutral, although the sub-bass is rolled off. The mids are slightly forward, but the treble seems neutral. The Ella provides good clarity and resolution, not much different from what you would hear on the LCD-2 or Sundara or M1070. Indeed, while I did the numerous A/B tests over several days, I realized how minor the differences are in regards to performance. By performance, I do not mean sound signature. When I say performance, I mean the following. First, bass transients. Second, clarity. Third, detail. Fourth, soundstage. And fifth, distortion or noise. Some of these things, such as clarity, detail, and soundstage, could be lumped into the sound signature of headphones. But since proponents of planar headphones constantly talk about these elements as if they are separate benefits to dynamic drivers, then we should separate them from the sound signature for purposes of our discussion. When we think of these 5 attributes, it becomes evident that none of the planar headphones I tested and compared here outshine any other. They all have fast transients. If you're nitpicking and trying to find the fastest of them all, maybe you could pick a winner, but you'd be splitting hairs so thin that you might accidentally scalp yourself. All of the headphones I tested here are similarly clear. You could say that the Ella is a bit clearer than the M1060C and the LCD-1, or that the Avantone Planar has slightly better separation of instruments than the M1070, or that the LCD-2 closed has a bit more clarity than the Ella. But again, we are talking small differences, not night and day alterations. Detail retrieval is very similar across the board. From the tests and summaries, hopefully you get the idea that some of these headphones do provide more detail than others. For example, the Sundara has more detail retrieval than the M1060C or the LCD-1, but is similar to the Avantone Planar and the Blue Ella. Again, when being hypercritical, you will find some differences. Soundstage is once again similar across the board. The headphones in this video had about average to above average soundstage. None have wide soundstage. None come close to the soundstage of the HD800S, for example. The difference in soundstage might be easily apparent when you go from the LCD-1 to the Sundara, but it becomes more difficult when you switch between the Avantone Planar and the Sundara. Finally, regarding distortion and noise, none of the headphones exhibit any of that. What I'm trying to say is that although all of these headphones have slightly different performance, again, I'm not talking about sound signature, they all revolve around the same locus of gravity. They're similar, sometimes hard to distinguish. This brings us to value. Is the Ella worth $700? Let me ask you this. Are the LCD-2 Classic or Closed worth their $800 and $900 price tags? My opinion is that the Ella, just like the LCD-2 headphones, is not worth the MSRP. I have said this many times before and I will say it again here. Price is a terrible indicator of performance. We have cheaper options than the Ella and the LCD-2 series. You've got the various Hifiman headphones, the Avantone Planar, the Sennheiser Ava, and the numerous Monolith options. All of these alternatives are considerably cheaper than the Ella's MSRP. The reason I went through the whole preamble here a few minutes ago was to help set this all up. You have no idea whether something is value until you put it into context. The context for the Ella is that there are cheaper planar magnetic headphones that have similar performance, sound signature notwithstanding. Sound signature is a completely personal preference. You get to decide if you like or dislike how a headphone sounds, warm, bassy, neutral, or analytical, or some amalgam of all of that. You get to choose what you like. But if you're looking for the traditional planar magnetic advantages, transients, clarity, detail, distortion, soundstage, then the cheaper options provide all of that. It is unfortunate that Blue priced the Ella at $700 because it directly competes with the LCD-2 Classic and Closed. And when given an opportunity to buy a planar headphone from Audeze, which is a well-known and much hyped brand, versus a headphone from a microphone company, I think most people would gravitate towards the hype. But let us consider the Ella at its current Amazon price of $400. Is $400 value? Absolutely. You see, the Ella has exceptional build. It is sturdy, it is comfortable, it is well accessorized. Yes, it looks very different, and its aesthetics might be sufficient reason for you to hate the Ella. But outward appearances aside, the Ella does bring a lot to the table at $400. I think the Ella has two standout features. First, the Ella's Formula 1 suspension system. As stupid as it looks, the system does in fact work. Had Blue opted for thinner or cheaper padding, we might be having a different conversation. But the Ella comes with some very comfortable ear pads and headband padding. The clamping force is a little bit on the tighter side, but the suspension system makes it feel more like a headphone hugging your head rather than a headphone trying to squeeze your brains out. The second feature is, obviously, the built-in amplifier. I know reviewers constantly say that something is a game changer when it is not. Well, the Ella's amplifier is in fact a game changer, and it's easy to prove. What other headphone has a built-in amplifier that you can choose to activate whenever you want? What other planar magnetic headphone has a built-in amplifier? None. I don't know if Blue patented the amplification design. I don't know if you can patent the general idea of putting an amplifier inside a headphone, but I think it's pretty neat and pretty odd. It's neat because it actually works and works perfectly. It's odd because nobody else has replicated this feature. The Ella was released in 2017 and no other headphone manufacturer has copied this idea. Between 2017 and 2021, Audeze has released the overhyped and terrible Mobius, the overhyped and underperforming LCD-1, and the weirdly unnecessary Penrose. And none of those headphones do what the Ella does. You could be similarly critical of Hifiman. In all their iterations and reiterations of headphones, Hifiman has not implemented a built-in amplifier. So, yes, the Ella's amplifier is a game changer. It's the only show in town. I think this amplification system is ingenious. It has practical use. Now, planar headphone users don't have to be tethered to desktop amplifiers and don't have to spend additional money on portable amplifiers or more powerful DAPs. With the Ella, you can plug it into directly a mobile phone, turn the Ella's amp on, and get noiseless, neutral amplification sufficient to effectively power the drivers. This is not to say that the Ella is faultless. It has its own problems. The Ella's proprietary cable is rather annoying. You can find this cable online, but it seems unnecessarily different. The Ella's design is odd, to say the least. Although I appreciate the Ella's fit and finish, clearly the looks will turn a lot of people off. The Ella's earpads are proprietary. They snap on and off, and you can't buy replacements directly from Blue's website. There is a third-party compatible earpad which works just fine, but it's definitely not the same as the original. Finally, the Ella's original MSRP is a bit cringeworthy. Audeze's pricing is bad enough, but Blue is doing the Ella no favors by forcing people to compare it to the LCD-2 series. And that is the limit of my concerns. You may or may not like the sound signature of the Ella. Its looks certainly are a talking point. However, if you want a planar magnetic headphone, then the Ella is definitely worth a strong consideration. The ability to use it with any device is a huge step forward in headphone design. I recommend the Ella. I am glad that I bought it. It's kind of the platypus of headphones, strange, unique, different, odd, and an amalgam of other creature features that all seem to work in harmony.